What actually separates a thriving civilization from one that's literally destined to collapse? It's pretty much the ultimate philosophical puzzle, isn't it? Hey everyone, and welcome back. In today's explainer, we're diving straight into an incredibly dense but deeply fascinating text to uncover what the author calls the equations of existence. Basically, these are the fundamental metrics that absolutely determine whether a society survives or fails. So we're looking at a profound piece of work by the philosopher Abu Yorub el-Marzuki, titled Equations of Existence and Survival. My goal today? I'm going to break down this complex journey for you. We're going to take his abstract philosophical concepts and map out exactly how they translate into real-world state building and societal survival. Let's get right into it. All right, here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll navigate through 6 main areas. First, the equation of existence and survival. Second, the reversal of goals and tools. Third, critiquing scholasticism and new awareness. Fourth, catalyst of liberation regarding geography and history. Fifth, man between nature and society. And finally, features of the just surest state. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the equation of existence and survival. Now, the core premise here is that civilizations don't just exist in a vacuum, right? They're constantly interacting, usually sharing tools, but, and this is a big but, they often clash over their ultimate goals. The author sets up this really interesting dichotomy. On one side, we have tools. Tools are quantitative. They're the material technologies, the actual physical methods a society develops. On the other side, we have goals. Goals are completely qualitative. They represent the spiritual, universal aims of humanity. And the author points out that tools are actually meant to serve our higher goals. But as you can probably guess, a wildly dangerous shift happens in a civilization when this crucial balance gets lost. Which brings us to Section 2, the reversal of goals and tools. So what actually happens to a society when it starts prioritizing material quantity over spiritual quality? Well, to answer that, the author draws on a pretty heavy concept from the legendary historian Ibn Khaldun, the corruption of the meanings of humanity. Let that sink in for a second. When tools, meaning material accumulation, physical power structures, pure biological dominance, when those become the end goal instead of just the means, humanity itself degrades. The text argues that society basically gets reduced to mere animalism, and that, unfortunately, inevitably leads to incredibly violent and oppressive governance. Now, the alternative to this corruption is fascinating. A corrupted civilization relies heavily on a master-slave relationship built entirely on physical power. But a truly thriving civilization, it completely rejects that dynamic. Instead, it embraces this concept of humans as vice-spheres by nature, essentially stewards of the earth. In this view, humans are equals. Our actual value is based on spiritual universality and moral conduct, not just who holds the most biological or material dominance. It's a total paradigm shift. Moving right along to Section 3, critiquing scholasticism and new awareness. So if this stewardship model is the ideal, you might be wondering, how did modern thought get so trapped in that master-slave dynamic? Well, the author's premise is that modern Arab thought has basically become stuck in what he calls a second scholasticism. By overly relying on external modern philosophers like Hegel and Marx, the text argues that society has completely ignored its own rich, indigenous critical heritage. To actually move forward and break free from this intellectual dependency, society has to look backward to its own historical critiques. And to map out that escape route, the author points to 3 historical pillars of the critical school as the absolute key to intellectual liberation. First, we have Al-Ghazali, who provided a profound critique of metaphysics. Second is Ibn Taymiyyah, who pioneered the critique of epistemology, basically how we acquire knowledge. And third, Ibn Khaldun, who offered an absolute masterclass in the critique of societal values. The author posits that fully grasping these 3 thinkers is the foundational requirement for reviving any kind of independent intellectual vision today. All right, Section 4, Catalysts of Liberation, specifically looking at geography and history. Now, how do these deep, abstract theories actually apply to the real-world geopolitical events we're seeing right now? The author points to very specific catalysts in the modern era. He posits that recent geopolitical shocks, specifically what the text refers to as the floods in Palestine and the Levant, act as massive awakenings. According to the author, these events serve as catalysts to break historical and geographical divisions, like the Sykes-Picot borders, and ultimately signal the end of cultural dependency. The goal here is to revive a unified, independent Islamic vision. It's definitely a fascinating look at how the author views current, highly charged events through this deep philosophical lens. Let's dive into Section 5,
man between nature and society.
Okay, so once a human is actually intellectually and culturally liberated, how do they interact with their environment and their community? The author brilliantly connects our physical existence directly to our moral duties. Think about it. We rely on 5 natural pillars for survival: air, water, food, medicine, and immunity. And to secure these, we're equipped with 5 physical senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But the absolutely crucial point here is that humans can't just exploit nature. We have to use our senses justly, honestly, and responsibly to secure these pillars. If we don't, we end up destroying the very environment that sustains us. It's essentially a perfect equation of natural balance.
However, that balance is incredibly fragile. Society has to constantly weigh demographics and resource creation against the destructive nature of luxury. The author brings Ibn Khaldun's famous warning right back into the spotlight here. Excessive luxury absolutely corrupts a society. It breeds dependency, it completely wrecks the existential equation we just talked about, and ultimately, it paves a direct, one-way path to societal collapse.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, Features of the Just Sure State. We've covered the philosophy, the intellectual history, and the natural equations. Now, how does all of this physically manifest into a functioning state apparatus? Well, according to the text, a legitimate state basically has 2 core duties. First is education, which ensures peaceful coexistence and passes down those spiritual goals we discussed earlier. Second is governance, which is simply the mechanism for resolving human disputes fairly and justly. And notice the emphasis here. A true state serves the community to maintain the equation of survival. It absolutely does not exist to rule over the community like a master. So this naturally brings us to the author's ideal just sure state compared to historical models. The author derives the specific model from the concept of shura, or consultation, blending the public ownership of a republic with democratic methods of governance. And importantly, the text argues that this model actively avoids the structural inequalities found in a lot of historical Western models. It specifically calls out the inherent master-slave dynamics of ancient Greek democracy and the racial hierarchies present in some European historical models. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the alternative if we fail to build this just state. The author delivers this powerful, frankly haunting warning from Ibn Khaldun: descending to the lowest of the low. If we allow our tools to become our goals, if we succumb to excessive luxury, and if we allow governance to become a master-slave dynamic, we turn humans into mere dependents. That fragile equation breaks, and civilization completely collapses in on itself. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to end today's explainer. Will modern states recognize this delicate equation of survival before our material tools entirely consume our ultimate spiritual goals? I really want to challenge you to apply this philosophical lens to the institutions, the geopolitical events, and the societies you see around you today. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the equations that govern our existence.